Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm reviewing my personal favorite version of Risk. Risk 2210, which I guess is favorite enough for enough people that it's still constantly getting reprinted. This is the most recent Renegade Edition version of the game, and this is a game that I grew up on. This is Risk 2210, the version of Risk that I played the most as a kid, the version of Risk that I enjoyed the most as a kid, the game that had all the elements of Risk that you know and love or tolerate or any of those things, but then also had a lot of things mixed into it. And now I'm going to talk about what the game does. I'll talk about the general nature of Risk, how Risk operates. I'll talk about specifically what Risk 2210 does differently. I'll tell you why it's my favorite version of Risk and what I like about it, but also despite being my personal favorite version of Risk, it still is Risk. If you don't like Risk, this has the best chance of changing your mind, in my opinion, but it still is very much Risk with all the problems that come with Risk, and so I'll talk about those things as well. But let's go ahead and dive into it. What is Risk? What is Risk 2210? How do these things operate? And what do I think about the game? Risk is a general dudes on a map game. It's an area control, dudes on a map game. Those two terms, area control generally wants you controlling a lot of areas. Dudes on a map is usually a subgenre of area control. Sometimes you could have dudes on a map without area control, but usually it's a subgenre of it in which you're trying to control areas, but specifically with armies. You have all these armies you're working with. In this case, you have these mechs sweeping across the nation over here. This guy's on his head, poor guy. And they're trying to take control of as much regions on the board as possible. In a general game of Risk, and this will hold true in 2210, you're going to start by trying to place your units down on various spots on the board. So you're just going to go ahead and do a draft, placing your units down on various regions, individual localized regions on the board, just on the landmass, not on any of these other peripheral water areas or the moon. Those are both unique to Risk 2210. General Risk will just have a general map of the board. And then when you're done doing that, you're going to start going through a sequence of turns where you effectively take your armies, march against your opponents, roll dice, see who rolls better, and then sweep across the nation as you try to take control of as many areas as possible. Generally in Risk, you're going to get more units recruited at the start of every turn for the more you control. So the rich gets richer in this game. The better you're doing, the more you're going to be spawning and generating, which means it effectively relies on the other players to team up against the person who's winning as their only possible hope of being within the game at all, because the rich get richer as you play through Risk. Now Risk 2210 will have that as well. The game is going to play across 5 rounds. You have your 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and at the end of your 5 you'll score everything up. So it does at least limit the elongated aspect of a game of Risk that could take 6-7 hours with just no end in sight. This is going to have a player who probably gets more dominant, but other players teaming up against them, trying to maintain that balance, all while you try to manage the Earth, the underwater territories, and the moon. And again, that's areas where Risk 2210 is going to be different. You're also going to have commanders in this game. Commanders are going to start with a basic land commander and a diplomat, but then from there you can pay money, because every single turn you're going to earn money as well as units based on the regions you control and based on sets of region. If you have specific region sets, you're going to earn additional money based on this chart. That's true for underwater territories over here, and that's true for the moon as well, as represented over here. So if you earn full sections, if you own full sections, you don't just get a benefit based on the number of regions you control, you also get a benefit for the number of sections, full sections you control. You're going to use those regions to populate the board every single round, to add to your enforcements, to slowly be able to take over more of the map, but then you're also going to use that money. That money can be used to buy space stations, it can be used to buy commanders, and then once you have the associated commanders, it can also be used to buy these cards. The cards and commanders, along with the various 2 regions of the board, along with the 5-turn counter, are going to be elements that really make Risk stand out, Risk 2210 stand out from its predecessor. You see, the commanders, they basically just roll higher dice. Generally in Risk, combat's going to favor the attacker, in the sense that when you attack, and this is true for regular Risk as well, you're going to have the number of the attackers, you're going to have a maximum of 3 dice, rolling against a maximum of 2 dice on the defensive side, and then you're going to pair up numbers. So for example, if you have a 7 versus 7 army attacking each other, you have a maximum 3 for the attacker, a maximum 2 for the defender, you roll, and then you pair up high results against high results. Now, the attacker rolls more dice, but ties go to the defender. So in this case, you would have killed 2 of the attackers. It's now a 7 versus 5 battle. You can choose to retreat over here, but if not, you can go ahead, roll dice, and then you continue to pair up. Again, the 5 beats the 4, but the 3 beats the 2 in this case. You lose 1 from each army. You're going to continue doing that until either the attacker stops fighting, and again 6 goes up to 2, 4 beats the 1, and you're gonna have attacker killing 2 people. So generally, over enough time, over enough rolling dice, an equally matched size army of the attacker is usually going to beat the defender as you just slowly plow through the troops, you're relying on the chaos that is the roll of the die, relying on the chaos that is luck to add that tension of, ooh, what's going to happen next. You have 8 people attacking 6, the defender could win a few bad die rolls, and you could find the attacker having to retreat, but in general, the attacker is going to win even with evenly matched armies. The game incentivizes that attacking. Now, Risk 2010 is already going to mix it up because you have those space stations, which will help everyone in your spot roll a higher value dice. You'll be rolling 8-sided dice instead over here, giving you a higher statistical probability of you rolling the numbers you need as the defensive team over there, but you also have the commanders. Commanders will roll different dice depending on the region. The naval commander rolls an 8-sided die when attacking to or from water. Same with the land commander and land, same with the moon commander and moon, although the nuclear commander will roll 8-sided dice in every single situation. And so you have different ways that they're going to be rolling dice to go ahead and enhance your combat capabilities in the game. But then not just that, you're also going to have these cards. These cards you can buy every single round, spending your money to go ahead and buy nuclear cards. You can spend 2 more money to do a rocket strike against the water, where you play a turn and you go choose any opponent's water territory, roll a 6-sided die, and they destroy units equal to the number rolled in the chosen territory. These cards, you can never guarantee what it is you're going to draw, but they all represent totally different ways to manipulate different things. The diplomat frequently stealing energy, all the various forms of attacking, dealing with either ways to find more energy as you wander and take control of different areas, little rocket strikes against regions, different things that will give you an edge in combat, edge in battle, relocation of units. You never fully spawning new units, reinforcements. You never know what you're going to get, which is part of the charm of these cards, but you can get some really cool cards that will really help you in that moment of crisis. Or you can draw a deadbeat card that might help you 4 turns from now, but 4 turns from now is too late. You needed something happening now. You needed reinforcements now. You needed increased attack now. You don't know what you're going to get, and you're operating with limited resources, to be able to go ahead and spend them on commanders, on space stations, or on those cards, or on playing those cards in the combat. And that's going to be the things that influence the game here. In order to attack to the water territory, you need to have a water commander. In order to go to the moon, you need to launch from a space station, but you need to have a moon commander. And so trying to choose which commanders you need, and again, resources are tight, especially as the game starts, until you manage to get more of a foothold and take control of territories, until you find those allegiances start to work out as everyone picks their territory they want to fight over the most, and starts to develop strongholds and protecting those strongholds, finding those key points. The game will start with 4 territories drawn at random, which will totally change the landscape of the map. If these 2 nuclear territories are over here, no one can pass through them in any way. It totally segregated off the entire Asia from Europe, which totally changed the entire landscape of the board. Asia is much more defensible than it ever is, and yes, this is a completely random draw. This is actually from the last game I played. But either way, this is going to totally change the landscape you play as you deal with those nuclear fallouts in the game. And that's basically what's happening in Risk 2010. Every single turn, across 5 turns, you're going to look at the board, see what you control, you're going to look at the regions you have full control over, get extra benefit there, turn those benefits into currency, units and currency you'll use to spend to enhance your abilities, to enhance your commanders, enhance your forces, gather more cards, and things like that, as you try to figure out what way to position yourself in the game to ultimately go for global dominance. That's Risk. That's Risk 2010. Let me tell you why this is my favorite version of Risk, although again, it is still Risk. So as far as why I like this version of Risk, and Risk is a game that I don't know if I ever fully loved Risk. I was always okay with Risk. Whereas Risk 2010 is a game that in my childhood I spent hours and hours and hours, Saturday afternoons, playing this game, enjoying this, well before I found the board game hobby as we know it now, or as I know it now I should say, well before I got to that point. This was a game that I thoroughly enjoyed, played a lot with my siblings, and went head-to-head every single time I had a chance to do so. I didn't know any better, and this was the best version of a dudes in a map game that I knew at the time. And part of that is the fact that the game limits itself to 5 rounds, so you don't have some of the elongated sessions of Risk you might have in another version of the game. It's one of the things I like about it. You do have that classic sense of military warfare. I do think there's something compelling about marching units across the board, a simulated combat where you roll dice against each other. Sometimes rolling dice is just fun. As much as rolling dice is not necessarily the best mechanic on its own unless you have ways to mitigate or adjust, but sometimes it's still just fun to march an army across the board, roll the dice to see what happens in the game. That's basically going to be true to any version of Risk, and it's true to this version of Risk as well. But that gets added to the fact that you have these cards, and these cards are so cool. They do so many cool, useful things in the game that it really enhances the entire game that you're playing. With the use of the commanders, the space stations, and those cards, they all add powers and abilities to a game system that needed something fresher to it. And then you have these key points on the board, these different water masses over here, the water colonies on the board, and the space station. that again totally change the landscape over here. Combined with the nuclear territories, it means you're playing a different game. Looking at your opponent and seeing if they have a naval commander in play is going to change how you interact with them. Noticing that the moon has no one in it and being the first person to jump to the moon, as much as the moon can be hard to defend, people I find are often reluctant to go to it, and so getting an early foothold on the moon can result in you getting a lot of extra resources unchallenged until people eventually realize that you are a threat that needs to be reckoned with, and they can't just leave you to have the lunar colonies all to yourself. The commanders and the cards, the powers and abilities, all of this, and again, there's nuclear fallout. The nuclear fallout is so much fun. I mean, that's not a sentence you should really be saying ever, especially not on YouTube, but the nuclear fallout in this game is fun. Watching those first 4 card draws and seeing how these play out and where they go, it is amazing how almost every single spot you draw ends up being a key point. You go into Sour Empire, boom, you suddenly can't get to South America, and these waterways are cut off. You want to go ahead and even just unite India. Over here, suddenly, Asia's more defensible from the naval areas. There's always going to be somewhere, almost always. Every once in a while you draw Aiden over here, and then when you do something like that, I don't know about you, but personally I recommend just redrawing. When you have a point that doesn't represent any strategic relevance, just go ahead and redraw. Find something that has some connection to some water colony or to some landmass somewhere, and those the nuclear fallout will totally change the way you approach every single game of Risk 2210, which makes it even more compelling on top of the variability you get from the different ways you explore combinations of commanders, from the different way you spend your resources to gather space stations. Getting space stations for those pivotal defensive moments in the game where you place them up against a key point and sit there and say, go ahead and attack me. I'm rolling 8-sided dice with all my troops all the time. I'm just going to sit here and defend and make this a key point. Well, that works until somebody goes ahead and launches a rocket missile at your zone, which is why there's always some way to break through and always some way to defend. Risk 2210 just does a lot more to the basic vanilla version of Risk, and all of those changes, in my opinion, are for the better. Now, it's still Risk. There are still things I don't like about this game, primarily because it's still Risk. But I'll start with the first one, which is, despite being limited to 5 years over here, despite being limited to 5 turn structures, I do find it is still too long for what it is. It still grinds to a slog. By the time you get to year 4 or 5, you're like, this was fun for the first 3 turns, but now it's becoming repetitive and we're doing the same thing every turn, and there's not enough mixing up the experience past the fact that you just have 2 people trying to gang up against the person who's winning, or I guess it depends on the player count. You have all the other players trying to gang up against the person who's obviously winning, and this game does have that rich get richer problem in the game. The game has the fact that you'll have a person who manages to take control of regions, manages to lock down certain areas, and unless all the players gang up against that player, unless they all work in cohesion against the other player, you are going to fall sway to their increased dominance, to their increased income that they get from controlling regions on the board. The game can be too long. The game does have the rich get richer, and those things which are very present to the basic Risk, even though Risk 2210 does improve on the length of the game, it still is too long for the game experience that it is. It's a game that I have incredibly fond memories of growing up, and when I got it back and dove into it, I was like, there's so much nostalgia to it. There's so much nostalgia and enjoyment, and this game that I loved as a kid, and yet there's still the recognition that it's not a game I'm going to pull out and play because it still is too long. Even if it's shorter than regular Risk, it still is too long for what it is. That rich get richer does depend on the game group. If you have players properly working together as a united alliance, it works well, but if you're playing with people who like that chaos, or forget the chaos, just if you're playing with either younger players or newer players, people who don't necessarily see the value of a strategic alliance, and rather they see the easy pickings of being able to march through into Europe because you're a little weaker there, if you have that happening, you won't be able to operate as a united front, and then Jack at the table, who currently controls all of Asia and all of Australia and is about to march into the regions over here, he will win. It's just the way it's going to work if you don't have the united front, and if you have players not willing to operate as a united front, the rich get richer is going to prove to be too strong unless the game maintains a perfect balance the entire way through. So as much as everything else about the game is a better version of Risk, it still has some of those basic problems that are present to Risk that make it a game that has a strong appeal, but still lacks some of that nuance and depth you might find in a more modern game design approach. As far as final thoughts on Risk 2210, I have to say that I like this game, and I'm certainly biased by the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia of a game that I loved and still have fond memories of, and am excited to play it still, because I remember pulling up those landmines, and you invade my territory, drop some water mines or landmines, whatever it is, and blow you up. It still has that nostalgia of these moments because I grew up with this game. But I also still recognize that it has some of the problems that are present in Risk, and so for me, my highest recommendation of this game is, this is my personal favorite version of Risk, and if you're going to play Risk, or if you enjoy Risk, I definitely recommend checking this game out. For me, I'm going to rate it, though, a 3.5 out of 5. it is still a good game. It is genuinely a good experience, although, to be fair, depending on who you are, it might be lower than that for you. If you aren't someone who appreciates Risk, if you're not approaching this game with some degree of nostalgia, this might be a worse game for you. I enjoy this game, but I also recognize that in the category of area control, in the category of dudes on a map, there are so many amazing, incredible, accessible games that will give you better experiences, and they don't all have to be incredibly complicated either. If you want recommendations, let's go ahead and move to recommendations. So final thoughts on this one, it's a 3.5 out of 5. It is my favorite version of Risk, and it still ultimately is Risk. If you want other game recommendations for dudes on a map, area control games that I recommend, you can check out Nexus Ops for an accessible area control game that is going to be, it's also from Renegade over here, but it's also going to be a lot more, it's going to be a little bit more depth to the experience, not nearly as long, while still giving it a little bit more basics. It's an older title as well, and that holds up, I think, a little better in the genre. That's going to be Nexus Ops. And if you want to elevate it to the next level, one of my personal favorite area control games is Blood Rage. It's an incredible experience that will distill the area control, the dudes in a map genre. It will distill it to raw fighting, raw abilities, drafting cards, lots of cool things happening, but in a game experience that doesn't seem to outstay its welcome the way Risk 2210 does. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.